All right, we are live. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to a special Comic Art Spotlight.
Hey, everybody.
A little out of the ordinary. It's not all comic art that I collect, and that a lot of people on CAF also collect various things, whether it's animation art or illustration art. And tonight we're going to be talking about science fiction and fantasy book and digest related art, something that is near and dear to my heart. I certainly don't own enough of it, but I've always been a huge fan of the genre. As everybody knows, I work on the Infected by Art book project, and I've been close friends with Patrick Wilshire, who runs IX, for years. And so I'm envious of the four gentlemen that I've got here this evening, all longtime members of CAF, all premium members as well. I really appreciate that. And when Doug, although I should say Doug has been on the show once. It was a few months back, and when we were in the green room chatting afterwards, I thought, this would be a really great idea, is to get four of the best, probably most well-known collectors in this genre to sit in on a panel and just talk about the artwork that we love. And so here we are tonight.
Awesome. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
We appreciate it.
My pleasure. So before we get started, though, I thought maybe we can come around, from Doug to Glynn and around, just kind of introduce yourself and maybe just say a little bit about how long you've been in the hobby and anything you'd like to add before we get started.
Okay, doke. I'm Doug Ellis. I've been collecting science fiction and fantasy art for 5 days. Since about 1988 was the first piece I bought. I collect pulp art as well as science fiction fantasy art. I co-run the Windy City Pulp and Paper Convention, held every year when there's not a pandemic, in Chicago, with the next one coming up in September. And I will pass it off to Glynn.
I'm Glynn Crain, and I basically got started in all this as a comic book collector when I was 7-8 years old. And collecting comic books, you learn to complete runs. Eventually, I had enough money and started collecting comic book art. And from there, you're exposed to the wider world of conventions, and you start seeing other things outside the comic world that interest you. And I got really heavily into science fiction and fantasy, art. In about 1989, 1990 was when I bought my first science fiction painting by Frank R. Paul. And from there, it just kind of accelerated. And, I'm going back a little bit to the roots nowadays and buying more comic art, but it's been a heck of a ride. Victor.
I'm Victor Dricks. I'm the senior member of the group in age as well as length of collecting. I've been collecting science fiction art now for 50 years. I bought my very first painting, which we will show a picture of later this evening, when I was 17 years old. I am a very avid reader of science fiction, fantasy, and horror. I read comic books when I was much younger, but at age 11, I sold my comic collection, which was the stupidest thing I could have ever done, and transitioned into reading. And I'm also a very avid book collector as well.
And I'm John Davis. I'm the newbie here. I've only been collecting for a mere 20 years or so. I went to the Worldcon in 2000 to meet some artist friends about a project, and I went to a great art show there, and it just opened a whole world to me. I didn't know people collected this. I didn't know people owned this stuff. I've always loved science fiction, and suddenly I saw all these covers to books that I'd read, and it blew my mind. And I made it my mission to go and try to find these pieces, and I've tried to made up a lot of lost ground these last 20 years. So the collections went from 0 to about 150 pieces now. So and really been enjoying it and meeting all these guys.
Absolutely.
So that's kind of an interesting place to start. For me, finding the artwork that you collect seems to be the biggest barrier, and it's probably just because you don't have as many art dealers out there, at least that I'm aware of, that deal in it. And so I assume the avenues that you have to find the artwork that you're adding to your collection is just very diverse, and it's this person, another collector has the work, so there's a lot of collector to collector sales going on. Is that what it typically would be?
Conventions and networking.
Yep.
Absolutely.
And it's actually much easier now than it was when I started collecting in the 1970s. There wasn't as strong an interest in the art, but the internet really has changed everything and made it much easier to track down art and contact other collectors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I started buying initially through Jane Frank, some of her catalogs, offerings and stuff, and that kind of got my feet wet. But it wasn't until I got plugged into the community and other collectors that then I really started to find stuff and kind of know what everybody was looking for, and they knew what I was looking for. And CAF really helps in that way too.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. So it's a long time ago not a long time ago, probably about 8 or 9 years ago, Patrick came to me and asked me about bringing the illustration exchange into comic art fans because, he just felt like that's where all the collectors were anyway. And it was, used to be a forum. So he just felt like moving it into our platform was a better way to go. And it was great for me because I always wanted to see more of that artwork and have more of that artwork on CAF. And I think that was around 10 years ago was when that, I think we saw a really good surge of this genre's artwork appear on the site, and I tend to always check out that section of CAF before I even look at the new art or what's popular that day, just because I love it. I wish I owned more art in this area.
We all do.
We need a more walls.
You can never have enough.
Yeah.
Very good. So, Doug, when we were talking as well, there's that gallery show that's at the Rockwell Museum that's coming up. Isn't that's in a few weeks from now?
Yeah, I think it kicks off on, I'm going to forget the date. It's the Saturday, June 13th is a Saturday, right? Or is it the 12th?
I think that might be the 12th.
I think it's the 12th, yeah. So June 12th, the Norman Rockwell Museum in Massachusetts is having an exhibit called Enchanted, which is a look back over literally centuries of fantasy art. I think the earliest pieces from the 17th century. And then it goes all the way up through to folks like Bob Eggleton and Donato Giancola and other modern artists. But a lot of the stuff is vintage stuff that the four of us collect. So I have on loan with them a St. John, Edgar Rice Burroughs Mars cover, and a Virgil Finlay A Merit piece. So it's a broad mix of stuff all in the fantasy genre. It should be quite a show. There's a catalog for it actually on Amazon now called Enchanted, which actually came out last year because the show was supposed to come out last year, and then of course with COVID it got canceled.
Mm-hmm.
But they had already printed the catalog up, so it's available out there if people want to take a look and see what's going to be in the show.
I'll have to take a look for that because I'm hoping to go to the show, but I don't know. I may not be able to travel to it, unfortunately.
It's going to tour.
Oh, it is?
Yeah, I forget what. I think there's two other museums that are going to get it after the Rockwell Museum is done, but I honestly don't recall what those what those are or where they're located off the top of my head. But it may stay on their website. If you go to the Rockwell Museum, it might discuss what their plans are for the tour after it leaves there.
Interesting. Well, I mean, hopefully it gets around. I know that, not having the IX show last year really left a hole in my heart because I'd gone to probably the 10 prior to that. So I've been wanting to see art on the walls that, are in this area with, as far as, I love seeing Bob's Eggleton set up every year. I've got a couple of Eggletons on my back wall. I love seeing his work and just seeing Donato and everybody over at that show has always been, it's like the highlight of my year. So not having one show really has been a downer for me for the last 12 months.
Sure.
Yeah, it's kind of a gathering of the tribe, so to speak.
It is. There's no other show like it, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I have to get to the pulp show though, Doug. That's
absolutely
that's on my list. So maybe I'll be able to do that this year too.
Yeah, that's the other thing you're talking about. Where does the art come from and how do we find it? Windy City was one of the best shows I'd ever been to about 10 years ago when I first went. And I go every year that I can. And that's another show we desperately missed due to COVID. So we're jonesing to get back to it because that's such a great show.
Well, thanks. It's obviously different than IllexCon in that it's vintage stuff, but for the vintage stuff, it's I think probably the largest gathering of it you're going to find anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And as Glynn was making the point earlier, it's not even so much about the art you find there, which there's a lot of art there to find, but you get to meet fellow collectors, you get to put names to faces, and you get to make connections, and you'll be acquiring stuff long after the show's over just through the network of people you've met at the show and made friends with.
Sure. It's the best show out there.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, I was going to say just one more thing about Windy City. You had me, Doug, when I went the first time, and you guys were showing 16 millimeter film in a screening room. It's like, that took me back to the early days of conventions when it was all on film. It was so exciting.
Cool.
Sit in there with your martini and watch, black and white Tarzan serials.
What's better?
Silent not saying it says don't give away all the good secret art buying places.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand that. Everybody's got to have their there a few secrets, right? I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, that's what sort of makes the hobby fun, and discovering those things, but also having those things that are just your own. But shows like Windy City or IX, you want everybody to know about those because those are places where you actually get to share the experience with a lot of other people.
Absolutely.
Right.
So did most of you come to the collecting art in this genre because you were fans of the writing, or you're more fans of the art? I mean, or is it a mix of both?
Well, I grew up in New York City, and in the 1970s, that was really a great place for comic book conventions, which I went to, and science fiction conventions. And at the time, my dad and I were book dealers, and so we would sell science fiction books there, and it was an opportunity to they all had art shows, and it was a good place to make contacts with artists and buy art. So I came to it really from my love of reading the books, and then discovering that there were conventions to go to.
Mm-hmm.
Mine was definitely more roundabout because I started out in the mid 70s going to Houston Con, which was a great convention. All the dealers at the time, Russ Cochran, Bruce Hamilton, Burl Rowe, all those kind of people would be there, but it was a comic book focused show. And, I bought my first Johnny Comet for like $50 and kind of discovered art that way. And then through a long process, eventually, because I loved reading science fiction, but had never been to the kind of shows that Victor was talking about, I had been to comic conventions. Eventually I discovered, that you could buy science fiction paintings. And so it was a more roundabout route for myself.
Yeah, and for me, it was about in the 70s when Star Trek was syndicated. I remember seeing it in the 60s, but I was really little at the time. But in the 70s, when it was syndicated, I got so into it, and it kind of woke me up to science fiction. And then I started seeking out authors like Arthur C. Clarke and Robert Heinlein, started reading the books, and I got really into it. I remember going to my library and seeing some of the early Ballantine paperbacks. And that's when I started imprinting on these covers and the artwork, like the Richard Powers pieces, which we'll get to later. I'm such a Powers fan. But that's when I kind of imprinted on that. But it wasn't until years later that I discovered, oh, my God, these pieces exist and can be had,
Yeah,
Right.
go ahead.
I was going to say, I didn't read a lot of early science fiction, but I had a lot of uncles that read those kind of books, and so they were always around, and I was always fascinated by the covers because they were so those 60s or maybe late 50s era covers that were so minimalistic but had a lot of just crazy science fiction images on them that I would usually thumb through the book, but it was the covers that sucked you in.
Mm-hmm.
And no, I mean I think that's where I started early on developing my love for science fiction fantasy was just from those book covers that I would see in the libraries of my uncles, and that's how it got me here today. And I wasn't a reader as much as I just loved looking at the books. I remember going to the library when I was 13, 14, just to see the book covers on all the hardbacks there, just because it was so neat. And I would pick books out to read based on the art that was on those covers. And I'm sure,
Right.
I mean, that's
we all did. Yeah.
right, exactly. And so, I mean, even if the stories were bad, it didn't, it didn't matter. I mean, it was the artwork on the cover that got me in. So
those covers like transported me. You look at it and it took me to a place I'd never been to before, showed me things I'd never seen before, and that's what excited me.
Yeah, I remember. I mean, I started buying paperbacks and digests when I was 12, 13 years old, and loved reading it. But I loved the covers too. And I remember maybe like in 8th grade, we had in one of my science classes, we had to learn how to develop film in a dark room. And everybody's taking all these shots of, landscapes or family or whatever. And I come in with a roll of Perry Rhodan book covers that I've taken pictures of to develop. And my instructors are like, "What's wrong with you? Why do you care about these book covers?"
Little did they know. But that is, I still find that interesting though, because it is a lot of this artwork is still, people don't know that you can buy it. I mean, you've seen you can look at, say, the Magic the Gathering artwork and the crazy prices that we've been seeing in that over the last 3 years. It's once everybody figured out they could buy it, then it's the values have gone up, I imagine, and you're seeing a lot more competition in this area than maybe you had prior, say 10 years ago. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it just seems like something I've been seeing, a lot more. And IX probably has helped, fuel that as well, but also just the fact that there's still a lot of traditional artists working in this, this area versus digital. That's just, and they're selling it socially, like you were mentioning earlier, Victor. The advent of everything being online, the artists have more. You have more access to the artists, and you're able to buy direct from them. And artists are always doing auctions on Facebook. It's definitely a different world than it was for us collectors 10 years ago.
Well, when I started collecting in the early 1970s, there was very little interest in this art, and Bob Weinberg and I did a lot of research and searching out original art. And I remember we hit the Galaxy warehouse where we got about 100 digest covers that were given to us on loan. And we could get them for $25. And Bob and I took them to Mid-Americon in 1976. And we put them out on our table. And we marked them up at $100, and I think we sold maybe 2 or 3 of these things. There was just very little interest in it until it seemed to change in the late 80s. That's when things really started to take off, and prices started to skyrocket, and people seemed to become much more interested in collecting the art. But for a good period there of at least 10 years that I was collecting, there was just very little interest, and there were very few people collecting the stuff. Bob and I would track down members of First Fandom who had been given paintings from the publishers, and we would buy pieces from them. There were science fiction conventions, but most of the stuff that we saw there was contemporary rather than vintage art. So it's really interesting how the field has evolved, and with it, the value of all this vintage art has skyrocketed. It's kind of a double-edged sword. For those of us who've been collecting a long time, our asset portfolio has increased, but it's painful every time we have to write a check for $10,000 or $15,000 to buy a painting. I can remember being able to buy paintings for $100 or $200 that now cost $12,000.
Well, Victor, if you want to go back to those days, I'll happily pay $100 depending on the ball behind you.
Let me think about that, Doug.
It's like real estate.
Very true. Very true. Well, I mean, but again, unless you can collect it. I mean, I remember before I was collecting original comic art, I would see it But because I really didn't know that I could buy it, I'd still keep just buying comics, and I'd walk by the art tables and not even think about it. But until it just that whatever clicked and I could buy it, I never stopped looking at it. Then I realized it was all around me, and so that could be the similar pattern early on. People didn't know they could buy this artwork, so they're just walking by the tables and they're not really thinking about that because they've got another mission while they're at that show to pick up a book that they want, or something else along those lines, and the art's just secondary. But once people realize they can buy it and they appreciate art, they're going to just gravitate to it.
Sure.
So do we want to look at a little bit of artwork from everyone's collections?
Sounds good to me.
Yeah.
All right. Glenn, is it okay if we start off with you?
You bet.
All right. And we'll cue the first one up right here.
That's an Ed Valigursky. That is entitled Conquest of the Space Sea. So that was an ace double, published in 1955. Robert Moore Williams wrote the story, and Ed Valigursky was one of the major stars at Ace Books. I'd say he and Imch probably did more covers than anyone else. And you always want, if you can get it, you want a robot in an Ed Valigursky painting. And this, for me, is one of the better ones that he ever did. It's a great example.
And in light of what somebody had asked earlier, if people do trades and stuff, I mean, you got that one in a trade with Bob Weinberg, as I recall.
Absolutely. Bob is one of the pioneers in all this, as Victor indicated earlier. He definitely was one of my first contacts in the field, and I was purchasing art from him and doing trades, and he was just an invaluable help. And he had encyclopedic knowledge of the field and the artists and the authors. I mean, Bob was a wealth of information, and he helped me along the path to becoming a collector.
That's a fantastic cover. I mean, it's a cover like that would make you want to read the book. I mean,
Sure,
Absolutely.
you'd have to check it out. At least read the foreword.
absolutely. No, it's a dramatic cover. Okay, so this is Lorelei of the Red Mist. It was executed by one of the greats, Kelly Freas. He's one of the most beloved, by the fans, artists, that ever has been. He won 10 Hugo Awards. I think 11 if you count a retro Hugo Award that they awarded him. But this is to a Lee Brackett and Ray Bradbury story. It was published in Tops in Science Fiction magazine in 1953. So not only is it a great Kelly Freas painting, it's also to a Ray Bradbury and Lee Brackett story. And those are the kind of associations that can take a painting that's really good and put it over the top when it has a great literary association. It can make it that much more desirable. And in this case, it's kind of a winner.
Yeah. Where'd you get that one from, Glenn? I thought, didn't Joe Sarno at Comic Kingdom in Chicago had that for a while?
Yeah, and okay, so there was a show in Chicago, and I got a call from Alex Eisenstein. Somebody had purchased it at the show, and if memory serves, this was one of those instances where I found out about it. I asked Alex, can you talk to the people and ask them if they would take X amount over what they had just paid at that show? I think they paid 10 and I offered 15, and they took it, and Alex brokered the deal, and I had the painting. It was one that I desperately wanted once I knew it had changed hands, and I kind of made it happen.
Yeah, and Glenn doesn't know it yet, but he will be trading this to me at some point.
And John doesn't know yet, but he's second in line.
Of all the Kelly Freas paintings I've got on CAF, this is the one that has the most views, and it's incredibly, it's a gorgeous painting, and it's one of Kelly's best.
Yeah, it's probably my personal fave of his. I love it.
Yeah, what's not to like?
He was an amazing artist, and I was lucky enough to meet him a few times at Comic-Con in San Diego, and he was the nicest gentleman you'd ever want to meet. So he was just a great guy.
Now, did most of Kelly's artwork get out by him selling, by him selling the artwork, or was there a rep at some point in time?
I know he had a rep at times. What was that girl's name, Doug? Do you remember?
Oh,
I can't. But he did go through reps at times, and he sold things, personally.
He went to conventions and would frequently be there at conventions selling.
Yeah, I remember seeing him at conventions all the time.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't think Mark Cornett dealt with him as an agent. Well, Kelly was alive. Obviously, he passed away, Mark.
Late in his career. Kelly was totally accessible and just such a gentleman. I mean, he was so easy to talk to.
Well, I'm envious because I never got a chance to meet him, but I've admired his work for so long, and that's one of my favorite paintings as well. What's the dimensions on that?
It's probably 12 by 15 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
In that kind of 12 by 16, that kind of a range. It's not a huge painting, but it's just beautiful.
Most of his paintings tend to be rather small.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he was very prolific, so maybe that probably helped.
He was, and his work in the 50s and 60s was just unequaled.
And we got a tip from Jeff Wedding this evening for the love of Kelly Freeze. Thank you very much, Jeff. I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Cool.
And here's another one.
Jim Burns.
Wow.
Yeah, that is a funny story. Okay, this is to a book called Mechanismo, and it was written by Harry Harrison, and it's basically a themed art book. So kind of like Planet Story that Jim Burns did and Harry Harrison wrote. Mechanismo is the same kind of thing, a series of paintings, and Harrison wrote, the background story. And I don't know if anybody knows Bernard Mahe. He's a French collector. He contacted me via email and said he had a buddy that had 4 Jim Burns paintings and, wanted to sell them. And I said, of course, I'm interested. He knew I liked science fiction paintings, and he was really more of a black and white collector. And 3 of them were from Planet Story, and the 4th one was from Mechanismo, and it's actually the cover painting. And, I naturally jumped at the chance. I think they were about $1,500 a piece. So it was like a $6,000 deal for 4 paintings. And this was the best of the bunch. And it's an incredibly iconic image. It was just a real knockout to be able to buy this. And it's probably the best Jim Burns I'll ever own.
Other than that commission you have, Glenn.
Yeah, fantastic commission.
The commission worked out really. The difference is this is something published that everyone knows, and the commission, unless Jim sells it to some book publisher, it'll never really be widely known like this one is. But this seems to be a Jim Burns fan favorite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, Glenn, you're hitting on something that's an important point for collectors, which is the distinction between published art and art that you commission.
Yeah, couldn't be right more correct there. A lot of collectors don't want it if it's not published.
Mm-hmm.
But like with the commission I did from Jim Burns, once you have a relationship with the artist, and I've known Jim for over 20 years, sometimes that distinction really doesn't matter because you just like the man as a friend and you want a commission. But as far as general collectors, they want it to have been published.
Well, and another important point, I think, which is, I think it's true of all of us. We buy what we love.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
And I always say, when you look at a piece of art, it should stir, your heartstrings, as if you're looking at a member of the opposite sex or the same sex or whatever turns you on. You should have that reaction. Where you say to yourself, "Oh God, I want that." And, so we buy what we love first and foremost. We try, I think it's important for collectors to be educated, to be aware of market trends and changes in value. But, the advice I always give to people is don't worry about buying art as an investment. I never did. I simply bought what I loved, and I guess I had good taste and I got lucky because most of it increased in value over time. But I always buy things to keep. I rarely buy things on speculation of I'll flip it next week and trade it. But that's just me.
Yeah.
But I think I speak for all of us when I say that we're passionate about what we do. And there is a love and a quest that motivates us.
Sure.
Yeah, and if the art appreciates and that you can make money on it at some point when it's time to part with it, great. But that's not the reason I got into it.
Yeah.
We all want to hang it up on the walls.
Right, exactly. If
So
it's
you can
not
see it every day.
Yeah, I don't want to store art. I want to hang it and look at it.
That's
Which
right.
is why, we all have traded amongst ourselves,
Sure.
but it's painful, to take a painting off the wall. I traded the painting to Glynn about 5 years ago, a Lawrence painting. I've had it for 25 years and I loved it. But I said to myself, I've looked at this thing every day for 25 years. I don't have to die with it.
Yeah.
Especially since he's making me such a good trade deal on it. So I was willing to part with it. But I think that passion is very important in collecting art. It should pull your heartstrings when you look at something, and you should have that, I think, emotional reaction that says, God, I just have to have that.
Yeah, whenever I look at Glynn's art collection, I see a lot of things where I just say, man, I traded Glynn all my best pieces. Why did I do this?
Well, I look at Glynn's collection.
I can say the same thing to you, Doug.
No. It's always one-sided. It's one-sided.
Well, the thing is, at the end of the day, all the art is beautiful, and it's just everybody's got it to varying degrees of enviability, right? But
we all focus our collections in different ways too.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the interesting thing.
Right, and the art makes the rounds. Like, it's funny how a same piece will make it between all of our collections. Like,
Sure.
I'll buy something from Vincent, trade it to Glynn for something I really like, and then buy it back later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's very incestuous.
Mm.
well,
It's a small circle of people who have been collecting over an extended period of time, who have built up large collections, and we all know each other. And
Sure.
I think it's true no matter what you're collecting. If you're collecting Picasso, you know who the other people are who are avid Picasso fans and who are spending, $35 million for a painting.
That would not be our art, by the way, but
If
But
you're
I
collecting
haven't
long-
seen
if you're
35
painting
million
long enough-
lately.
One
but
day.
I'm looking forward to it.
all right. Let's look at another artwork from Glenn's collection here.
Robert Schultz.
That's
Wow.
it.
So this was a painting that Doug and I acquired at a certain point, and then eventually I divested myself of it and then reacquired it. So this is absolutely a wonderful example of a 1950s science fiction painting where mankind has conquered space. And it was to a paperback book called Operation Future. And that was published in 1955. And Schultz is really probably better known in mainstream paperback publishing than he is in science fiction. He did some wonderful examples in science fiction, but I think he's probably more widely known in the crime, mystery, general mainstream science fiction. He was a very accomplished painter, as good as anybody in the field, and this is a particularly strong example.
That's absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, it's a great piece.
It is, and it's quite large as well. It's a very impressive painting in person.
and this goes to my point that all the good stuff goes from me to you.
Absolutely, Doug.
Something like that, something that is on the walls of your home.
It is. Can you see the easel in the corner?
Oh yeah, there it is.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, sorry, wrong one
No,
here.
that's Doug.
Yep, sorry, clicked on the wrong one there. Ah, there we
There it
go.
is.
See it. Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
See if I can point to it right there.
Yeah, I could tell that Doug framed that because it's got the black frame and the black mat, right?
No, it's not a black mat, and the frame, while it's black, is actually a bit more colorful for me than usual.
I have to admit, I actually changed the mats after I got it from you, Doug.
You heathen, you.
I know, but I have 3 Robert Schultz paintings. He's incredibly talented. I wish he would have done more work in science fiction. He was absolutely a fabulous painter and way underrated, at least in our field. Roy Kronkle, Out of Time's Abyss. So obviously it's got the Edgar Rice Burroughs hook to it. It's a terrific example, by Kronkle of what he does, the action, the adventure, Lost Race, the whole 9 yards. So this is another Ace book. This was F233, and it was published in 1963. And it was also used on a recent Vanguard book called The Art of Roy Kronkle. So Kronkle paintings are really tough to locate, and this is one of his top examples that I've ever run across. And this is a case. I acquired this from a gentleman named Gary Fairfax. I don't know if anybody remembers him, but back in the day, he was the guy selling the Frazetta posters. And I mean, like back in the 70s and 80s. And he had a terrific art list that I bought 2 Kronkles off of. Eventually, I traded them to Bob Weinberg. I was looking for Kelly Freas and Virgil Finlay paintings, which Bob had in abundance. So I traded this Kronkle to Bob, but I told him, hey, if you ever let it go, call me. Well, eventually he did, and I reacquired it. So very happy to have it back on the wall. It's one of Kronkle's best. And of course, as everybody knows, Roy Kronkle was a huge influence on Frank Frazetta in getting Frank Frazetta into the book, dust jacket and cover painting market.
Wow, that's a beauty. And hey, I there was a question earlier from Brian Peck, but fortunately Mickey answered his question about what Freeze was doing in the 80s and 90s. Thank you, Mickey, for adding that bit about still working in the SF magazines in that same period. I appreciate it.
He absolutely was. Kelly had a very long career.
Wow.
Ed McShuller. So this is to a Andre Norton novel called Starguard, and it's also an Ace double. This was a Ace double D199, and it was published in 1956. And I first heard about this having hit the market when I was informed that a friend of ours had just purchased it, and I was crestfallen. I knew that that's one of the best imches best paintings that Ed McShuller ever did, and I also thought it was one of the best Ace covers that was ever done. And I immediately, contacted the person that bought it, and it took a very involved 3-way trade involving Doug, and I was able to bring it into the collection. But I thought I had lost my chance, but persistence paid off, and it's just one of the most incredible, paintings that I've ever seen, especially by Ed McShuller. This is top of the line. Hard to find anything better than this by him.
And you had to involve a third person to make the deal work.
Oh, yeah. Yep. It took me trading something to Doug and Doug to this other gentleman, and that came to me. So it was very, very involved, but it finally worked.
And my biggest mistake about the whole thing was this other gentleman who was involved, who had that piece originally, lives relatively near to me. I mean, a couple of hours away. And so in order to do the trade, he drove out to my house, gave me that Emsh, and I foolishly mailed it to Glynn. What was I thinking?
Should have just kept it.
I should have. It was in my possession, man. It's the law, right?
Well, it's good that stuff like that can work out. I mean, I hear similar things happen in comic art, not too frequently though, but sometimes that's how you get a deal done. You have to involve other people.
I really didn't think we were going to be able to find anything that fit the bill, but we did, and it worked out. And I was incredibly happy and surprised all at the same time.
Well, congratulations! Yeah, that's a beauty. And that would have been hard to hand off, Doug. But you know, you got to do what you got to do.
Yeah, I do what you got to do is right.
Absolutely. Okay. So this is by an artist that not as many people are going to know. Maybe not as widely known. This is Chris Foss. So he was a British artist, incredibly talented, very active in the 70s and the 80s. He was really known for his space hardware and spaceships, just beautiful paperback covers that he did. And this was to a DAW book. Let me get the details so I don't mispronounce it. There it is. It's called The Dramaturges of Jan by John Brunner. And it was a New English Library paperback in 1974. And as I mentioned, his artwork on this side of the Atlantic is really difficult to find. And this particular one was probably my favorite. And I acquired this in a trade from another good buddy of ours that lives up in the New Hampshire area. So very hard to find Chris Foss's work. He's an incredible artist. There was a really nice book done on his art a few years back. And I encourage anybody that likes this type of science fiction artwork to take a look, because Chris Foss is really terrific.
It's fantastic. And we've got one other artwork here from your collection, Glenn.
One more piece. Wally Wood.
Yeah.
One of my absolute favorite artists of all time. This was something that I acquired from a good buddy that most comic collectors are going to know, Roger Hill.
Oh, yeah.
So Roger was kind enough to let me buy this from him back in the day. This was a book entitled The Forever Machine by authors Clifton and Riley. This was basically a Galaxy novel. Galaxy published digest science fiction magazines, and they branched out and they were doing these Galaxy novels. There was probably 30 or 40 that they published. This was number 35. So this was published in 1958. You know, for my money, Wood in the 1950s was unsurpassed as a comic artist, and he was exploring, doing these paintings for Galaxy. And this is one of the strongest ones that he did, you know, for that magazine, for this paperback. And I just love this painting. I'm a huge Wally Wood fan. Everything from his EC artwork to his Marvel artwork to all the stuff, black and whites and color work he did for Galaxy. And to have this just really, you know, made my day.
Wow, that's an amazing painting. I mean, from the subject matter to the colors, palette, that's just a beautiful painting.
Yeah, it has everything you'd want from a Wally Wood, with the sexy girl and all the machinery. Mm-hmm. You know, it's a vibrant painting, and I'm so happy with it.
No, I think we're all envious of that one. At least I am. All right, Victor, how about you being next up to show off some of your collection?
Sure.
All right, let's pull up the first piece here.
This is a beautiful oil painting by Hansbach. It was published by Emil Pataya in the 1960s in a color portfolio that he did. And they're like many of the, what I always say about collecting art is there's usually a very good story behind every acquisition, as you've already heard Glynn relate. I was contacted by Vincent DeFate, who had a Meltzoff painting, and he wanted to sell it, and he had somebody in mind, a customer who had expressed interest in it, but he didn't want to deal with the individual personally, and he knew that I knew him, and asked if I would broker a sale. He gave me a price, and I contacted, my first call was not to this individual, but to Glynn. And it's kind of a famous story between the two of us. I called Glynn to let him know about the availability of this Stanley Meltzoff painting that I figured he would have an interest in, and he was not home. And so I left a voicemail message for him, and allowed a little bit of time to go by before I went to the next guy on the list. And the next guy on the list did answer the phone and was interested in the Meltzoff. And I had Vincent and I had worked out the terms of my commission. And I told this individual how much he would have to pay me in addition to the price of the painting. And he said, well, how about if I give you something in lieu of the money? And he offered me this painting, and I leapt at it, and it's one of my favorite Bach paintings.
It's gorgeous.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yep.
And it's pretty large. It's probably, I'm guessing, about maybe 18 by 24, something along in that size.
Now, I guess I should be asking, as far as like are these done on board, or are they done on canvas?
This particular one is done on a masonite board.
Masonite.
Yeah, and Bach used he was very poor, and he experimented. He studied with Maxfield Parrish. He spent the summer with Parrish in Pennsylvania, and you can see some of Parrish's lighting techniques reflected in a lot of Bach's art. But he made his own paint, and then he would tend to glaze these things also, and he often painted the same scene half a dozen different times with very slight variations.
Hmm.
But,
that particular scene you've got there, Victor, is one he comes back to several times, not just even with paintings, but a number of black and white he's done on sort of the same theme, like the Sorcerer's Skipper.
Yeah, very, very talented artist who was actually gifted. A lot of artists, Virgil Finlay, for example, are spectacular with their black and whites, and their paintings are often equally spectacular. And Bach was talented in the same way. He had a very vivid imagination, and a lot of his paintings showed very strange looking creatures that were kind of hybrid human like, and one of the great talents of the field. Died at age 50 in 1964.
Wow. Too early, that's for sure.
Far too early. Now this is a painting by Ed Emsch. It's for a single paperback by John Taine for a novel called The Greatest Adventure. And I bought this about 25 years ago from a fellow collector, had it for a good 20 years before Glenn managed to pry it off my wall as part of a trade. And I really didn't want to give it up, but he made me such a good offer for what he wanted in exchange that I said, all right, I'll do it. The nice part of the story was, I think it was only about a year or two later that I managed to get it back from Glenn.
Absolutely.
And it's now back on my wall with the original matting. Glenn seems to have a penchant for changing the matting when he gets paintings.
Yeah.
And he had put a dark red mat on this thing, which I thought made it look a lot smaller. And the first thing I did when I got it back is I took it back to the framer and said, "Here, change the mat on this." So it's on my wall now, and one of my favorite Emsch paintings.
Very nice. Now, do you guys typically shoot your own work as far as to get a nice image from it, or do you? Because I see a lot of the artworks are framed, so I'm assuming that any of the good scans that you've gotten, you must have had done before you had them in the frames, or what's the typical process for all of you for that?
Well, I used to basically have a room where I could hang a painting. I had directed lighting. I could turn off the lights behind me, used a tripod and had a really good Nikon, and shot all the stuff myself. Basically, the lights are coming in at an angle, and which is avoiding the reflections. So it's almost like creating a dark room just with lighting on the painting and using a Nikon on a tripod.
Yeah, that's what I do too. With the 45 megapixel cameras now, you can get really good high res quality images, and careful lighting to angle so it doesn't reflect.
Right.
And then you have to have sometimes a black backing behind you to keep any on one of the reflections if it's under glass.
Right.
And you can get some really good quality images.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm pretty much the same, although I've got a large scanner. It's a little bigger than 11 by 17. So if it's not framed yet, then it's small enough to scan in two pieces even. I'll often just use the scanner and put it together that way.
I'm the amateur. I just use my iPhone.
That works too.
Right.
Sometimes they come out, sometimes they don't.
Well, that's why I was curious. In your gallery, Victor, that particular painting by Ed, you have it framed really nicely. That's why I looked at that and I thought, I had to ask because I was curious if you had it scanned before it was framed.
I took that one was taken with the iPhone.
Wow.
The prior painting, the Hansbach painting, that was professionally photographed because I gave it to Jared Walters when he was doing the Hansbach book. It's included in that book. And in fact, that same painting, I believe, is going to be used on another Bach book that's going to be coming out, a reprint of And Flights of Angels.
Jared's also working on a big Kelly Freas book as well.
Yep.
That's going to be nice.
Oh, wow. When is that due out?
Who knows?
He hasn't released that. Probably another year or two, but
Yeah.
Yeah,
I know how book projects go. But and I should add, just so everybody who's viewing the show this evening, if you're viewing it on YouTube, I did put the links for all 4 of their galleries on CAF in the description. So if anybody wants to be pulling up their galleries while they're talking or just looking at better scans through their gallery, feel free. And if not, definitely check them out after the show.
Right. And if anyone has anything to sell or trade, let us know.
absolutely.
Right.
We're not saying who to contact first.
Now, this is a painting by Frank R. Paul. It's from September 1940 issue of Science Fiction magazine. This is one of the very earliest paintings that I bought, and there's an interesting story here. We mentioned our good friend Bob Weinberg. Bob called me, it was probably 1972, perhaps, and he said, I sent postcards to everybody who ever received artwork. I guess it was Planet Stories used to give art if you had a letter published, and they would reprint your address in the magazine along with your letter. And Bob sent out hundreds of postcards to people who had letters printed to see if they had art and was interested in selling it. And only one person wrote back. And he said, I misplaced the postcard, but I remembered that he lived in Pennsylvania somewhere. I remembered his name. Maybe you can track him down. And so I went to the public library on 42nd Street in Manhattan, where they had copies of all the phone books in the United States. And I went through all the major cities in Pennsylvania, and I actually found this guy. And so I called him up, and believe it or not, he still had artwork that he had received from the magazine. And at the time, I was, I think, maybe 18 years old, and I was working at Gimbel's department store. I didn't have a car. He agreed to come to New York City with a portfolio, and he met me. We went to a coffee shop, and he pulled this painting out of the portfolio. And it was the only, he had this and two Paul black and whites that I bought from him, in addition to two black and whites by Hansbach. The thing I really liked about Paul, he was great at, he had an architectural background, I believe, and he was great at machines and cities, but not very good with people. And the people here are fairly good compared to most of the characters. I love the animals and the strange creatures. And it's a beautiful oil painting on canvas, 18 by 24, and one of my best and earliest acquisitions, which I paid all of $75 for.
Wow. So you've had that for quite a while.
I still have it. Yep.
Yeah, I'll give you $100 for it, Victor.
Let me think about that.
Make a profit.
That's 25% profit.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'll get back to you on that. Now, this is Dark Piper. This was Kelly Frias's first commercial sale to Weird Tales magazine. It appeared on the cover of the November 50 issue. It is an iconic image. I got this in trade from Alex Eisenstein in 1989 when I was at the World Fantasy Convention in New Orleans, and I had an Emsch painting, which was a cover from Galaxy magazine that had a kind of humorous bent to it, and it wasn't for sale, but I told him I had it, and he really wanted it badly, and he said, "I'll trade you this for that." And I said, "Absolutely, okay," and I gave him. I came back to my table, and I remember Bob and I were sharing a table, and I told Bob the story, and he just flipped out. He said, "There's no way he's ever going to do this." I said, "Well, we made the deal. We'll see. As soon as I get home, I'm going to send him the Emsch painting," and I did. And sure enough, he sent me the Frias painting, and it's really one of my favorites. And years later, I met Kelly at a science fiction convention. We got to talking. I have several pieces of his art, and I mentioned that I had this, and he wanted it back really badly. And he said, "That's my first commercial sale. I really would love to have that. I'll give you anything that you want in exchange for it." And I said, "Well, Kelly, I love your art, but frankly, I can't think of anything better to have than this piece." And he was not too happy about that, but that's the way it went. So it's still hanging on my wall, and one of my favorite paintings.
That must have been tough to disappoint him.
It was. He said, "I'll do a commission for you. I'll paint anything you want." He had copies of one of his art books there that he was autographing, and we went through it, and he goes, "I'll give you this, I'll give you that." I'm like, no, I don't think so. And he was disappointed, but I thought, well, I love this painting. I don't want to part with it.
Disappointing, but what a great compliment, though, to have that much love for a piece.
Yeah. I really loved it. And like I say, to him, it had, emotional attachment to it, since it was, I believe, his very first commercial sale.
I mean, do you think he sold it himself, or do you think that somehow the publisher had the art and it got out that way? Or
I don't know. My guess was, I don't know. Alex Eisenstein would probably be able to tell you because he bought it.
Mhm.
He had it, and he would probably remember where he got it from. But I don't know.
Well, I just think because it was so important to him that he probably wouldn't have sold it in the first place.
He may not have gotten it back from the magazine, but he
Yeah.
didn't. I mean, he never said to me, "That's mine. Give it to me."
Right.
He was a gentleman, and he never did that. So maybe he had sold it at one point. I don't know.
Yeah, it was actually pretty unusual for pulp or digest magazine publishers back in those
To
days.
get it back, yeah.
The art. So I'm sure it was just held on to by the company, and when they got sold or needed some space, they got rid of it.
Mhm.
Yeah, because as we said earlier, there was no market for this artwork. The artists had no real incentive to get these things back because they were only paid $50 or $100 for the painting. People weren't collecting these things. Later on, when people started collecting the artworks, the artists got smart and said, "I want everything back." And some people like Frazetta did that from the get-go. But most of the artists lost control of these things. They turned them in, and they never saw the art again.
Yep, that is a story for that time period.
Yep.
Now this is a Kelly Frias painting from Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine, and there's a great story to go with this. My dad was a science fiction fan, and he got me started reading science fiction when I was a little kid, and I got him started collecting art. And as I mentioned earlier, he and I for 20 years were selling antiquarian books. And my dad had an uncanny knack of being able to find things in the most unlikely place. He would turn things up in flea markets that were valuable. He called me up one day and he said, I just bought 2 paintings. And I said, "Yeah, okay, yeah, where?" He says, "Well, I walked into this bookstore in Coney Island in Brooklyn, and I saw 2 paintings hanging by clothespins from a rope that was stretched across the store." And he said, "I immediately recognized this painting because I had seen the magazine at some point." And so this is 1973, maybe?
53.
No, not the magazine. The
Okay.
story.
Right. Sorry.
It's 1973. So my dad says to me, I saw these things and I went to the owner of the store and I said, "What do you want? What are these things?" He said, "Oh, those are some paintings were used in magazines." So my father says, "What do you want?" He says, 12. So my father says, "I'll give you $10 for the 2 of them." So the guy said, "Okay." So I immediately started yelling at my father over the phone. And I said, "Are you crazy? Why didn't you just give the guy $12? He could have kicked you out of the store. You wouldn't have got these paintings. What were you thinking?" He goes, I knew I could get them for $10. So he got this painting and a Gray Morrow painting, which was a cover from Worlds of Tomorrow, which is on my CAF website for $10. So I guess you could say this was my $5 Kelly Frias painting.
Amazing.
Yeah, I've never been a haggler.
You can't make up stories like this, right? I mean, it's just so improbable.
Well, your dad sounds like a very interesting guy. If he $12, you should have just thrown the money down and walked out with the art and not
That's
quibbled
what
about
I said. But my dad always liked to negotiate and try to get a better deal. So, and he did. Now, this is a painting by Virgil Fenley from the Pyramid paperback book Spell of Seven. It's a anthology of fantasy stories edited by L. Sprague de Camp. This is the very first piece of original art that I ever bought, and I think I started out well. I went to visit a friend who I had met at a science fiction convention. And he had told me he had original art. And he also had pulp magazines, which I was interested in. And I went to his house. He lived on Long Island. And he had this painting hanging on the wall, and I fell in love with it. I just absolutely loved this piece. And I asked him if he wanted to sell it. He said, no, I'll never sell it. I really like it. And I said, all right, okay, And I think I bought some books from him, and I left. About a week later, he called me up, and he says, are you still interested in buying that Virgil Finlay painting? And I said, yeah, I am, depending on the price. And he said, well, I want $175 for it. And I said, yeah, that seems reasonable. Okay, I'll buy it. And so I went out to his house to pick it up, and he says to me, you're very lucky. I said, what do you mean? He says, well, you weren't the first person I called. He said, somebody else had expressed an interest in the painting, and I called them first, and they would only give me $150. And this person is listening tonight and is known to all of us, but will go nameless for the purpose of this conversation. And he continually refers to it as my Finlay. That I leave it to him in my will, because it's rightfully his. And I've had more fun of needling him about that $25 that he didn't spend. So like I say, every painting has a good story behind it. And this one just happened to work out well. And when I got it, it really lit the fuse for me for the idea of collecting original art. I hadn't really given it all that much thought beforehand, but I thought, if I'm buying the books, it's nice to buy the cover paintings from these books to display with the books, And so that's how I got going, is collecting art.
What year did you pick that up?
I think that was 71.
Wow.
I think I was 17 at the time. That was the very first piece of art that I bought. And I should point out, I was working at the time in Gimbel's department store. I was making all of $100 a week. That was 2 weeks' pay. The price of paintings have appreciated in direct proportion to my salary, and in some cases far exceeded my salary. So, I talk about, these $100 paintings, back then, that was a week's pay. To buy a Bach painting, I can remember eating soup for a month to come up with the $300, because I was only making $100 a week. It took me that long to scrape the money together, and I was eating ramen noodles, for a month to be able to collect that stuff. So these things, we talk about how cheap they were, 50 years ago, but I didn't have any money, and so, I wish I had a time machine and could go back and buy these things, but $100, Virgil Finlay black and whites could be had for $100 in the 1970s. I know, because I bought a lot of them and resold them, but that was a week's pay for me,
Sure.
So the art has appreciated faster, in some cases faster than my weekly salary, but not in all cases, thank God.
Well, see, Victor, you were lucky. You were making $100 a week. I was getting an allowance of $3 a week back then.
I was only 3 years old, so I wasn't doing anything. I wasn't getting a quarter for dusting anything in the house or vacuuming yet. But the funny thing is, nothing has changed. Even today, there are many collectors who are eating ramen just to be able to stay in the hobby. So, if you're passionate enough about it and you're willing to spend the money, I mean, I can't see how many people aren't.
You got to do what you got to do. And sometimes these opportunities arise and you're never going to see them again. And as Bob Weinberg, our mentor, always used to say, the only art you regret is the art you don't buy.
Very true. Words to live by. Let's see. We've got one more artwork. Okay. Here we go.
Now, this one also has an interesting story. This is The Wizard of Oz by Michael Haig. In 1976, as I mentioned earlier, Bob and I went to Mid-Americon with about 100 cover paintings. We had 2 tables, and we were trying to sell these digest cover paintings. And Michael Haig walked into the room. It was the convention was in Kansas City, and he had a portfolio, and we were the only people. Russ Cochran was there with a table, but we had 2 tables, so he came to our table first, and he said, "Hey, I'm an artist. Take a look at my stuff." And he opened up this portfolio, and this was one of the paintings that he had there, and he said, "I'm here because I know Tim Kirk, and Tim is working for Hallmark Cards, and he's got me a job, and I've just started. And do you think you could sell my art?" And he only had, I think, maybe 5 or 6 paintings with him. And Bob and I said, "Well, what do you want for these things?" And he pulled out 5 of them, and he wanted, I think they were only about $150 each. And so I bought 2, and Bob bought 2, and Russ Cochran bought 1. And we cleaned them out. And he had nothing left to sell, and then went on to work for Hallmark, and later became really one of the foremost contemporary illustrators of children's books. Very, very nice guy, but again, it's a small world, and because we were there with our table selling art, we got to meet Michael. And Russ Cochran, as soon as I looked at this, I said, this guy's as good as Arthur Rackham. He hadn't published anything, I don't believe, at that point, but I said, this guy's got a brilliant future ahead of him, and I want the stuff, And Bob said the same thing, and so we bought 4, and I think Russ Cochran, I know, bought the 5th, and that was it.
Well, there's no greater feeling you can have when you're buying artwork direct from the artist. I mean, that when you made their day, there's no haggling. You pay them what they want. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, that's like one of the best feelings I have. I'm not a big art collector, but when I go to IX, I love being able to pick up around 12 to 15 artworks because I'm, buying something directly from the artist, and you can always tell, when they really appreciate that. So. I mean, that was probably they were probably surprised that they walked.
I believe that was his first sale of original art. He hadn't published anything yet, but I had the same good fortune with Michael Whalen. He walked into a convention in New York City, probably I think it's maybe 1971, and he had come in to meet with Donald Wollheim. And had a portfolio with him, and he brought paintings to show Donald Wollheim because he wanted to do illustrations for door paperbacks. And as soon as I looked at his stuff, I said, "This guy is brilliant. He's talented. I want to buy his art."
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thank you, Victor. So, John, you're up next.
All righty.
Here we go.
Okay, so this is by Richard Powers, Our Lady of Darkness, the cover for the Fritz Leiber book. And Richard Powers is a huge, I love his work. I have got more Richard Powers paintings than anything in my collection. I love McShuller and Valigursky. I've got several of those and some of the vintage stuff. But Richard Powers is one of those guys that I imprinted on early in those racks of Valentine books. And so this is from a little later in the 70s, I think. I think Fritz Leiber won the World Fantasy Award for this particular novel. And, Powers, some people think, oh, he just does that abstract stuff. But he could do really excellent figurative work. He could kind of paint anything. But he kind of would do not paint scenes, from the book or images from the book. He would kind of paint images that sort of captured the feel of science fiction. But occasionally he would do scenes from a book, and this is actually one that is a moment from the book, and I didn't realize it at first. But if you're familiar with the book, the main character, his apartment is cursed or haunted, however you want to say, and he's in San Francisco, and he goes on a walk, and then he looks back, and it's, I wonder if I can see my apartment from here. And with a pair of binoculars, he looks and he sees his window, and from the window he sees this specter, leering back at him, and that's what this image captures. And you can see that I didn't understand at first when I first saw this why Powers painted the mat. It's like it's all black painted around it with these two lines, top and bottom. But that's his abstracted window. And so this is the moment where we're looking back at the window and the specter that's inhabiting his apartment looking back at him.
Wow, it's beautiful.
Yeah, I love the colors that Powers did a lot of horror stuff, almost as much as he did science fiction. But even his horror works are like really dazzling and colorful. And I like all the elementals and yeah, it's a wonderful piece, I think. So this is another Richard Powers piece, and actually another one that actually is a scene from the book. It's from the Time Machine. And this is actually the second version of this painting that Powers did. He did an earlier version that is almost identical, and it's unknown why he painted it a second time. I don't know if the original was lost or destroyed when they wanted to go and do a reprint or why, but this is the second version that he did in the early 60s. But it depicts the end of time, when the time traveler, goes to the end of the earth, where the sun has become this sort of, red giant, huge life as we know it has gone away. And the only life remaining is this sort of, horrible thing creeping out of the ocean. And there's no trace of mankind. And the way he's captured that here with this sort of abstracted style with the time machine and the sort of the silhouette of the time traveler. I just think this is a great piece. I think it's a wonderful piece, and I don't know why Glynn ever sold this to me.
Thanks, John.
But yeah, another example of, hey, occasionally Powers would paint a scene from the story.
I love it. I mean, that's reminiscent of the covers that turned me on when I was, checking out my uncle's library. Just, simple, but, sucked you in and just made you want to read those books.
Yeah, it's another one that transported me. When you look at that, I just feel like, okay, what is this place? And it's a future Earth and the end of time. How do you paint the end of time,
Remind me again, John, why I traded that away.
Yeah.
Well, Powers was instrumental in changing the face of the science fiction paperback. Up until his time, as we have displayed, most of these covers were relatively garish. There's an intellectual sophistication to his surrealism that was completely different. I think Emscher Times came close to that kind of surrealism, but Powers really brought it to a whole different level and transformed the look of the paperback rack.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Betty and Ian Ballantyne said that they chose him as an artist for just that reason, to create respectability for these paperbacks, which were selling in drugstores on a wire rack.
Yeah, they were trying to reach a different audience, ones that may be turned off by the big-eyed monsters and guys with ray guns and stuff. And so they wanted to like bring it up to a more a respectable level, I guess, in their terms. And, Powers was not a science fiction fan at all, but he saw this as a way to riff on surrealistic artists that he always admired and liked. So you can see little beats of different artists, like, Tanguy was a huge touchstone for him, the surrealist, Mata, Miro, a bunch of them. And you can kind of see little elements in there. And he goes, yeah, it gave me a way to work out some of those, do little exercises. And then he would have this fine art on the side, which is what he really cared about. And a few of these artists did that. They had their illustration careers, But then they also had fine art careers, like, Paul Lehrer and Powers, and several of these guys did.
A lot of these artists weren't interested in getting the paintings back because they were almost ashamed of them.
Well, Powers would cut his up. He cut up so many paintings. There's so many paintings you see, like his covers, that don't exist anymore, except that they become components in other covers because he would literally cut them up and use them as collage elements.
Wow. Well, it worked for hire, right? I mean, sometimes I guess they didn't see the personal value in it if they were doing it that way, but fortunately they didn't cut up everything.
Right, exactly.
Definitely.
Yeah, so this is another Powers piece. So this is the cover for New Maps of Hell. And it's actually a nonfiction book by Kingsley Amis that explored the themes of science fiction and so forth. So this is kind of an example of what Powers might typically do for a cover, which it's not a scene from a book, but it captures the flavor of science fiction. So, here, since it's a general book about the themes of sci-fi, he's sort of represented the different tropes. You've got the rocket ship and the astronaut and the robot and a couple of alien beasties, and even the main alien beastie up front. If you look at it, it's basically the face of the Scream. And again, it's that sort of nod to these other artists that Powers enjoyed, and how can I work them into a science fiction cover piece?
Yeah, it's really cool.
And this piece is actually pretty small. Like, a lot of his pieces were not much bigger than the paperback itself. And this is an example of that. It's a pretty small piece.
It's nice. I mean, but again, that's the kind of artwork that I was looking at when I got turned into a science fiction fantasy, junkie.
Right. It's so alien. It's like, what is that? Where is that? So this is a piece by Paul Lehrer, who kind of was cut from the similar cloth to Powers. Powers opened the door to a lot of artists like Lehrer to kind of flex their abstract surrealist muscles and to kind of do something a little different. Paul Lehrer did a lot of really great works where he just emphasized scale and scope and lots of little crowds and tiny people. And you see these repetitive themes, like he had this thing about these egg shapes and just multitudes of egg shapes and eyeballs. And you kind of see these motifs over and over again. And kind of like Powers, he would kind of have this sort of surrealistic landscape and then populate it with all these things that sort of, again, just kind of gave you a sense of otherness. And even though this is not like one of his major pieces, it's just, there's little touches in it that I just really enjoy. Like even the woman in the piece, the fact that she's just kind of floating, she's not even in contact with the ground, I just thought was just really, really cool. And I do want to take this opportunity for a quick plug, in that I'm actually working on a documentary for Paul Lehrer for his estate, and they started to do this a few years ago, and the project, the original director passed away, unfortunately, and we're resurrecting it. Have a new director, and I'm helping to produce it. And so hopefully we'll have something that we might be able to premiere at LuxCon in a couple of years.
Oh, that'll be great.
That'd be great, John.
Absolutely.
Yeah, if you ever need anything PR'd, as far as that I could run through CAF or any of the channels that I've got, please, feel free to send me that information. I'm happy to share it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll definitely do that. So this is a work by John Berkey. Two of my favorite space artists are John Berkey and John Harris. John Berkey, he is known for his spacecraft, and he's got so many cool, stylized, sort of impressionistic sort of spacecraft that he's done. He's also, big into, he did a lot of movie posters like King Kong, Towering Inferno. He worked in caissons. He would mix his pigments himself. His studio was really fascinating because he had a mirror system that he could sit at his desk and paint, and he had a series of mirrors all around the room. He would glance at a different mirror, and he could see the piece from different distances without getting up. So he was a really interesting dude. But I so love this piece. It was my screensaver for years back in the late 90s. And Jane Frank had this piece. And back when she was selling a lot of her works, I didn't think she had this anymore until she sold it to Pat Wilshire. I went, oh no, I didn't know she still had that. So I told Pat, I said, hey, if you ever need to sell this, let me know. And he had to make room, and it came up, and so I nabbed it from him. And I love this piece. It's one of my favorite ship scenes. It's called The Visitors. All these different Berkey ships coming in over this, pastoral setting. I think it's, he was so great. He could paint landscapes. He could paint ships, space scenes, abstract. He's so good with light and tone. I think it's a great piece. It's a really big piece too. It's pretty impressive on the wall.
Which is exactly where that should be. That thing's amazing.
Yeah.
Cool painting.
Yeah, and so I mentioned my other space art hero, John Harris. This is a John Harris piece called Saturn. And I believe it's from a scene from Enceladus, the frozen moon around Saturn. I think this is a stunning piece. As far as modern science fiction illustration, it's one of my favorites of the last, decade or two. He has such a way with scale and again, composition, that shadow coming off of Saturn is just so cool, so devastating. I just think it's wonderful. And the amount of movement he gets in the piece, with the blowing snow from the towers, and he's always got these umbilicals between the ships and the way they're hanging there. I just love his palette and his sense of scale, and he's just an impressive guy. He's a British artist. Lot of book covers that he's done, and just a really good guy.
Yeah, it's amazing. I was going to say I love the way the shadow comes off the planet over the rings, and it just breaks up the space in such a unique way. You just wouldn't think to do that.
Yeah, it's such a strong statement, and it's just again, it looks great on the wall. It's another fairly large piece. A lot of his pieces are big. John paints big.
Yes.
Well, congratulations on that one.
Yeah. Thank you. This is another British artist, Bruce Pennington. And Bruce, I remember this distinctly when I was a kid watching this, and it kind of freaked me out. He did a lot of really cool horror stuff along with science fiction. And I don't have a lot of horror in my collection, but pieces like this, I found it so striking, and I loved it, and I loved his work. And it's such a sense of otherness to it, like the landscape. It doesn't look like hell. It looks like an alien world. And what is this, flying bat-like creature? Ironically, when this was published, they heavily tinted it red for the book. And I guess the art director wanted it to be more hell-like. But to me, this, before they tinted it, the original painting itself is so much better and so much stronger. But I found it's really hard to find Bruce's paintings. I've only encountered this one stateside. It's the only one I ever found, and I was able, to buy it. But they're really hard to find.
I can't imagine it tinted in red now. Just looking at that image, it's just not what I would expect.
Yeah, it just it reduces all the contrast. It just makes it kind of more stereotypical, like a hell scene, as opposed to this sort of weird otherworld kind of idea.
All right. Well, we have one more artwork from you as well.
Yeah. So this is Vincent DeFate, who a lot of people probably know, who's he kind of fancies himself a gadget artist, but he's so much more than that. He does some great figurative work. This piece is from the early 80s, when the whole cyberpunk science fiction genre was sort of hitting its stride. It's for the cover of a book called Antibodies. It's about a group of young people who are in this sort of cult where they're trying to do body modifications and and putting more and more technology into their body and sort of becoming something else, sort of this transcendental, sort of idea. So I thought he really represented that idea well here with the three figures, and I just thought it was a really strong piece. It's one of my favorite pieces by DeFate, and again, it's one of those things where a buddy of mine got it, and I was like, wow, that's one of my favorite DeFate pieces. If you ever think about it. And then sure enough, the day comes along where they remember your name and you're able to acquire it. So I got this just actually a few months ago.
Well, it's a very unique color palette, that's for sure. That's really cool.
Yeah.
And that's why, on CAF, a lot of people will put those feelers out a lot because, the emails kind of stay out there forever. And even if the person's not selling at that time, they might be one day, right?
Yeah, exactly right.
All right, Doug, you're up next.
All right.
Thank you, John. And let's see, here's the first artwork from Doug.
Okay, so this is a piece by an artist, George Barr, who got his start in the early 60s, but really had his heyday in the 70s and into the 80s, doing work for books and digest. This is for a book published by Ace in about 1971, I think, Elidor by Alan Gardner. And my wife and I like it. We're both fans of D&D and all that sort of thing. It does just have sort of a D&D feel with all the creatures in it. I mean, it's not D&D related at all. It predates D&D by a couple of years, but we like little creatures and the dungeon sort of scene there. So this is one that I picked up at. This was one I actually was a nice guy about this one for a change, and I know my fellow panelists will find this hard to believe, but this was at Windy City probably 15 years ago, and a fellow collector saw it first and was debating about whether to buy it or not. And he put it down and walked away. And I asked him if he was going to buy it. He said he was still thinking about it. And I actually waited until he came back and said he decided not to buy it before I jumped and grabbed it. But of course, about 10 minutes after I bought it, he came back and said, I've changed my mind. I do want to buy it. I said, well, now it's too late. Now I did buy it.
Sorry, I was actually looking in your CAF gallery, Doug. I saw that Hansbach. I don't know how I missed you adding that to your CAF gallery in late April, but wow, sorry. That's a beauty. But all right, moving on to your second artwork.
This is Clyde Caldwell. I collect cover art for the book series Dre Prescott that was published by Daw in the 1970s and into the 80s. And this was Caldwell's one cover for that series, Allies of Antares. I always liked Caldwell's cover. He was known, I think, really more for his gaming art than his book art, although he certainly did do a lot of book art. But, back in the day, I used to play Dungeons & Dragons all the time, and he was one of those guys who got hired by TSR to do a lot of module art and covers for, like, the Dragon and things like that. So this is I actually had two Caldwell pieces at one time, this and a Dungeons and Dragons piece, which we really liked, but which unfortunately I got that proverbial option you cannot refuse on it. So that one went away, but please will still have this one.
Yeah, that's really nice. Well, a lot of collectors have gotten the offer they can't refuse for early TSR in the last 5 or 6 years, I think. Sadly, yep. That's why I'll never see the pieces that I want. If anybody ever finds a Bill Willingham, just a dwarf illustration of any kind, that is my dream piece. I would practically give up any piece in my collection just to have a spot illustration by Bill Willingham. As crazy as that sounds.
Hey, none of it's crazy.
Yeah, I know, but I'll never see it. I can almost freely say that, knowing that I would never have to do it. So.
This is another piece by Emsch. Besides doing science fiction, he did a lot of fantasy as well. And this is for a story by John Jakes in the new series of stories about Brack the Barbarian, long before Jakes became a best-selling author of early American fiction. So this is The Girl in the Gem. And this is another one that I picked up in an early Windy City, probably 15 or 16 years ago. A friend of mine had this piece there, and I saw it right away when the show opened. So I took that. I mean, it's a barbarian piece. It's Irish. It's got a girl and a gem. How can you go wrong?
Yeah, it's very dynamic.
And I love that city too.
Yeah. It's a little power less a bit for that city there.
A bit, yeah.
Yeah, John's getting me a little bit more into Richard Powers. I was never a big Powers fan, but seeing John's stuff, talking to John, I'm slowly coming around. So my goal now is to buy a Powers painting that John wants, and I can lord it over him.
Oh yeah, there we go. Hey, it all works.
All right.
I'm glad I can help to turn you.
Thank you. You had something more I need to collect. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Well, that seems to be very cool about this hobby is you're kind of always learning, right? About you're not it's not like you know every artist and appreciate them all. It's something that you can kind of still grow into as you go through the hobby. Your taste can change a little bit. Your view of you might appreciate something today that you're not going to be as into 10 years from now. But that seems to be the neat part about it. I mean, just looking at the variety of artwork that we've already looked at so far, I mean, it's running from surrealist art all the way up to some things that are very realistic and everything in between. I think that's what's so great about science fiction fantasy artwork is it spans such a scope of artistic talent and taste that it's just different than collecting comic art. I love comic art, but I love the illustration side of our hobby, just as much, and for all those reasons.
It becomes financially dangerous when you love it all, though. It's like I love Powers. About a third of my collection is Powers, but I love the ray guns and girls and bug-eyed monsters. I love that too. I mean, it both has a place. They each scratch different itches.
Mm-hmm. All right, here's another artwork from Doug.
All right, so this one's a piece by Kelly Freeze. This is a bit later than the pieces that Glynn and Victor showed. This is from the 70s when Kelly was doing a lot of work for Daw books for cover by a Gordon Dixon novel, The Picture Mass. And this is one. So WindyCon is not to be confused with the Windy City Pulp and Paper Convention. WindyCon is one of the large Chicago-based science fiction conventions every year. And I picked this up at a WindyCon about 16, 17 years ago. My wife and I stopped by there actually not to visit the convention because or to attend it really. We were actually on our way to Michigan to go to another show run by a friend of ours, Ray Walsh, Classicon, which was going to be on a Sunday. And we were setting up to deal as dealers there. But we stopped off at WindyCon that Saturday on the way out of town because I wanted to put out flyers for our show, the Windy City Pulp Show. And since we were there, we decided to, buy memberships quick and just walk around for an hour before we hit the road to Michigan again. And we walked into the dealer room, into the art show rather. We immediately saw two of our friends, Bob Weinberg and Alex Eisenstein there. And I claim that when they saw me, their faces fell. They always said, "Oh no," they were happy to see me. But they were like, "Oh, there's nothing here to see. You can go now. Nothing here to see." Well, what there wasn't there to see was that Gordon Dixon had passed away, and all of the art from his estate was being sold at the auction that night at WindyCon. And there were probably at least 24 pieces by Freeze. There were probably close to a dozen pieces by Emsch. There was Vala Gerthy, some other artists. Most of it was black and white interior art, but there was a dozen or so covers. And so we canceled our plans to continue on to Michigan, and we stayed at WindyCon for the rest of the day and attended the auction that night. And I bought a bunch of covers there, including this one in interiors. And Bob bought a bunch, and Alex bought a bunch. So it was a great impromptu visit.
Wow. Right place, right time. You cancel the rest of the trip.
I did. Worked out well. This is one that I acquired recently, and actually Glynn and I both own this piece. It's by Ken Kelly, and back in the mid 70s, Kelly did a series of, I think, 12 paintings for Berkeley Medallion, based on the stories of Robert E. Howard. They all appeared as wraparound covers on the paperbacks, and there were some hardcover editions published as well. And then in the paperbacks, they also were printed as fold out, like sort of mini posters. They were like folded in three, and you could open the book out and fold them. And then they were later used on a calendar that Berkeley put out of the Ken Kelly Howard art. And I've always wanted one of these things. I remember these from, when I was probably at that time 13 or 14 when these came out. And I just thought they were tremendous. Some of the best work that Kelly's ever done. I think Glynn would agree with me on that. And so he and I had the chance to pick this one up a few months ago. So rather than beat each other up over it, we decided to join forces and pick it up together.
That's great. I like Ken Kelly's work a lot, and that's an incredible example.
Yeah, the lighting and tone of that is so cool.
All right, now this one we talked about this one, Doug, after our interview the last time.
Yes,
Very memorable. Yeah.
Again, another favorite book series from back when I was growing up, the Xanth series by Peter Anthony, for the book Castle Ruma. And this I picked up at an estate sale about half an hour from our house. A friend of mine called me up one day. This is about 3 years ago, I guess, at this point, and said that he had seen this ad for this estate sale. That some of the pictures were of fantasy art, and so we went with him to the sale. And we walked in. This was one of the first things I saw on the wall was the sterile suite. They also had 2 paintings by Don Mates. They had some great Steve Fabian art. I picked up a great Frank R. Paul pulp interior from Famous Fantastic Mysteries. And we've gone to a lot of estate sales, but this was by far the best we've ever gone to in terms of original genre art. But again, it just shows you that, we're collecting this stuff through friends, through networks we've created, through, things like CAF and conventions, eBay, Heritage, the other auction houses. But then, every so often there's something random that comes up like this, where, half an hour away from me, there was this guy who happened to have a collection of, 20 fantasy pieces of original art in his house. And, when he passed away, the estate sale company just sold it as part of the rest of it, along with the pictures and everything else was all this art.
That's phenomenal. I mean, like I told you, that's one of my most favorite covers from that book series, and very envious when you showed me that.
Well, if I ever decide to get rid of it, I'll remember your name and let you know.
If I am in the market, I would definitely like to know.
Yeah, Daryl Sweet is somebody I'd always like to find a piece by.
Yeah, he's good. You didn't see his work that often. This one I picked up at a Windy City about 5 or 6 years ago. It's by Jack Gaughan, who was a very prolific artist in the 60s, 70s, won several Hugos, who was an art director for Galaxy and for IF and some of the other magazines published by that chain. And this is the cover for the second Dune book, Dune Messiah. John Schoen here is known probably is the most well-known Dune artist with the covers he did for the first book and several of the others throughout. But Gaughan did this one as the cover for the second book, published by Putnam, and I was thrilled when I saw it at Windy City to be able to acquire it. I've always loved that series, and thrilled to get one of the covers for the series.
Wow, that's a piece of history right there. That's really nice.
Yeah, that one got actually comments from one of my non-collector friends, because I post art on Facebook from time to time that I picked up.
Uh-huh.
And So I put that on my Facebook feed, and one of my friends from high school, who's not an art collector at all, posted like, "Holy crap, you own a cover to Messiah!" He's like, he wanted to come to my house on a pilgrimage just because that book series was so profound for him, even though he's not an art collector at all.
Mm-hmm. That's saying something. I mean, that the covers really conveyed the story, and they sold you on the book, and it just they sucked you in. So even people who aren't art collectors can appreciate it.
This is by Bob Eggleton, who's one of the more well-known science fiction artists working today. Right up there, I think, Michael Whalen in terms of the number of Hugos he's won, and every other major award known to man is sitting on his mantelpiece as well, I believe. And Bob's Bob has a lot of different styles, but one of the things I like about his work is that, to me, he's really got, maybe better than any of the other contemporary artists, he's great at conveying sort of the sense of wonder that I think some of the more well-known vintage artists, like Hubert Rogers and those guys had in their work. It's different, but it has that same sense of wonder to me. And so this is doubly great for me, beyond being I think a great piece of art, but it's also for a classic novel by Robert Heinlein, Spaceman Jones, and it's big, which and something, as we've discussed, a lot of this is different sizes, and it's all great, whether it's 10 by 14 or 20 by 30. But this is a big piece, and size is its own quality sometimes when it comes to art. And when you see this picture, unfortunately, does not even do it justice, because really to appreciate this one, you've got to sort of see it in person. Something like John's John Harris pieces or Paul Lair, where it's just so good when you see it in person. It just has that much of an additional impact to it.
And I have to interject something here, Doug, too. I have to say that I'm sure that I've got more Bob Eggleton pieces than all of you guys combined, because Bob Eggleton did concept art for Neutron and Ampoli. So I've got probably a couple of hundred concept pieces that Bob's done. We've become really good friends, and yeah, he's a great guy, very prolific, and as you say, gives you that sense of wonder, which really translates well into cinema.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Bob's work as well. It's the painting. See, there it is. That one. That's of my daughter. So Bob's got an angle. My daughter would go to IX with me, and she would be one of the models that they would do the photographs of, so they could do later paintings. And Bob always told me, it's like, I'm bringing this painting. You have to see it. And so he had that painting of my daughter, so I had to buy it. And it's you can't back out of a deal like that when Bob paints a picture of your daughter. So I was very lucky to get that. I was happy. He's a great guy. I picked up a few other pieces from him as well. I really love his artwork.
Yeah, great artwork. Great guy. He and his wife are just great folks.
I completely agree. So I'm sure you saw the comments that we've got. Let's see, where was it? An amazing panel of collectors this evening. Pat's let us all know. So I am. Like I said earlier, I was really happy to be able to get you guys all on together. I thought it'd be fun. And Glenn, I always wanted to talk to you. And John, I've seen your collection for a long time. Victor, the funny thing is we've met before at IX, and I didn't know whom you were. So now and that's the great thing about doing these online panels. It's just that I'm able to realize how many people I've talked to in the past, and I didn't know whom I was talking to at the time. So
yeah, it's great to finally be able to talk to you, Bill.
Yeah. You're always running around like a madman. 6 million things going on, and harried behind your table. So it always makes you take up your time talking there. So these have been great.
No, I hope to have it down to about 4 million things at one time in the near future. 6 million is a little bit more than I want to juggle. So,
if I can throw 2 plugs in or different things, as we've mentioned, the Windy City Pulp and Paper Convention, which has a lot of art of this type, is barring some unforeseen circumstances with the pandemic, going to be held this year, September 9th through 12th at the Weston Lombard in Lombard, Illinois. So check out the website if you're interested in attending that. We'd love to see you there. And I also do, as Bill knows, as all of you guys know, periodic sale lists of vintage art like this from myself, my own collection, as well as different consigners. And I've got another list coming out in June, which will have art by many of the artists you've seen today. So if you go into my CAF gallery, look me up under this name and shoot me a message through CAF. I can add you to my mail list for when the catalog comes out.
I added myself a few months back.
You did. You're on the list. The suite is behind you. It's proof.
Yes, exactly. So, and John, definitely let me know when you're going. If you need any PR for the documentary, I'm really honest. I would like to help out however I can.
No, I appreciate that, and I'll definitely reach out when the time is right, when we're down the road a little bit more, get a little closer. That'd be great.
I'm always here. I don't get used enough in this area. I push a lot of comic art related PR and news out there, but I don't get to, other than my work with Pat, I don't get to do a whole lot. So, I do push out the, Wow Arts emails and the things that they do, but I kind of stop. So I do a little bit of work for Hildebrandt as well, but again, I'd like to do a lot more.
Well, I think we should put in a plug for you, Bill, because the Comic Art Fans Gallery is really a fantastic asset, I think, for collectors. It's a great way for all of us to let the world know, when we pick up a new piece. We all track each other on Comic Art Fans, and as soon as one of us picks up a piece, everybody else, knows about it.
Mm-hmm.
And you just do a really fantastic job with that. It's really a great asset for the field.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you.
Indeed.
Thank you. No, it's it's a labor of love. I built the site because I was a collector and I just wanted a site that I could use as a collector, and I just kind of built it out from with that idea in mind, and I've always just made it what I wanted it to be and taken feedback here and there, but that's really by and large why I did it. So I've always viewed it more from the collector side, that I always keep wanting to make it more of what I want it to be, so I never miss a thing on CAF or part of the hobby. So no, I'm glad you guys see it the same way.
And
You've done a great job.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, we're almost at the 2-hour mark. So like I said, 2 hours goes by really, really quick. So.
That it did.
But I'm sure this could be a subject that we touch on. I could see doing one of these every 6 or 8 months or something, because it's something that's really near and dear to my collecting taste that I don't get the opportunity to talk about too often. So I wouldn't mind doing another roundtable, next winter or something, if you guys were up for it. Maybe after we go through a cycle of a few conventions where you guys can pick up some new artwork, whether it's at Windy City or if it's IX, and then maybe sometime next winter we can talk again and just see what new pieces you guys have picked up.
Well, we've all got plenty of things hanging on the wall to share with the public out there. So don't be shy about asking us to come back.
All right, and again,
if we never bought another piece of art for the rest of our lives, we could do this till the day we died.
Right now, it's a little weird for me because we just sold our house in LA. We're moving to Tucson, and everything we have is in storage. So all the art is in storage in LA, and all of our furniture is in storage in Phoenix, and we're just sort of homeless right now. So one day we shall be reunited.
Yeah, the really odd thing is that John didn't take me up on my offer to store all of his art at my house while he was.
I wonder why.
That as you express more and more interest in Powers too.
Yeah. I mean, you would have gotten most of it back, John.
Yeah.
Oh, but and remember, everybody, the galleries for all 4 of these gentlemen are linked in the description below. So I definitely encourage you to go out and check them out. Leave a few comments, send them an email on anything that you really, just let them know that you appreciate the fact that they shared their collections on CAF for so long. And, you should, everything that we do here is a celebration of original art collecting, whether it's illustration art or comic art. And so share that passion every day with the people who share their collections on CAF. And please do visit all 4 of their galleries. in the near future.
It's hard to believe. I think you've been on CAF 20 years in like a couple of years, right? All right. I mean,
Yeah. It was our 18th anniversary was February 1st. So
Oh wow!
yeah, no, you've been at it for a long time.
it's hard to imagine. Most people don't, and I've said it before. Most people don't stick in the same job for 18 years, but that's why again, I've always viewed it as a collector. Just like all the people who use the site. So it's never felt like work, and I think I'm pretty fortunate to still be doing what I'm doing after all this time, and I expect to be doing it for another 18 years at the very least. So
That's awesome.
all right, everybody. Well, thank you so much for tuning in this evening, and I certainly appreciate it. We've got a couple more shows this week, so you'll see my face again tomorrow and Thursday, and I think on Saturday as well. So again, thanks guys again, and I hope everybody has a great evening.